Good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. In the first part of the conversation tonight, we spoke about India's COVID recoveries versus fresh cases. We spoke about how some states have begun to show a decline in daily cases, but deaths remain high, and what really this picture tells us, the data tells us. Now let's talk about the other aspect. Even as we are hopeful that perhaps the second wave will now begin to decline in intensity, we must talk about what has also been the economic impact of the second wave so far. Many of the states are in a state of lockdown. Some have been in that state for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Some have just gone in the last couple of weeks. None of them seem to be in a mood right now to change their decision. So once again, the economic activity has slowed down, and any hopes that we had of our recovery and a speedy recovery have now stumbled upon another big challenge. Now let me tell you some of the key indicators that tell us just how worrying the situation is. The wholesale inflation data recently came in, and it's now risen to its highest in a decade. That's the WPI. The labor force participation has fallen again in the last few weeks, is now back to the levels that we saw in May 2020 during the lockdown. Unemployment at its highest since June 2020. 73.5 lakh jobs lost in April 2021 alone, and then more states went into a lockdown and businesses were forced to shut. Salaried job losses are now also being witnessed in rural India. Just like COVID this time has spread from the cities to rural, we are also going to see an impact of that on the economy and on people's spending, on the pain everywhere. The April household income is down by 17%. Jobs demand is up 102% under the Manrega, the Rural Employment Generation Scheme. It's the highest we've seen since 2011. And the growth forecast is now again being revised by most agencies. So those who were expecting India to grow this year by 11%, 12%, 15% are now beginning to again revise it and bring it down. Let's tonight put the spotlight on economy one more time. Look at where the pain points are and ask one simple question. Is there need for government relief package? And if it is, will it be the center? Because we don't hear too much from the center this time around when it comes to COVID handling or even economy. Or is the onus going to be on the states? Can they really handle it? Let's say good evening to the panelists who are joining us right now to give a sense of what the state of economy is. Professor Arun Kumar, Chair Professor for Institute of Social Sciences, former Professor and Chairperson for Center for Economic Studies and Planning at JNU. Madan Sadmavis, Chief Economist at Care Ratings, joins us this evening. Anil Padmanabhan, Senior Journalist with us this evening. Vineet Agarwal, President for the Associated Chamber of Commerce and Industry of India, ASSOCHAM as it's known as. And Sunil Alag, Business and Brand Consultant, also joining us this evening. Madan, let's start off with you as to what would you think are the key pain or concerning areas right now. We were on our path to a strong recovery. We seem to be stumbling again.
No, I think, Tanvi, it's a repetition of what happened last year. We had the COVID impact, the infection levels increasing. We've seen states going for a lockdown. Last time it was a national lockdown. Now I think virtually all states have various kinds of lockdowns. The impact has been very much similar. So even though we are not, there's been no restriction on movement of goods. But if I cannot consume goods which can be produced, there's no need for me to produce. So non-essential goods, so-called non-essential goods cannot be produced. All the services have been closed down, which really means that there is very limited consumption which is possible. This means that overall growth is going to get affected. When I say overall growth, we also have Care Ratings started off at a projection of 11.2%. Today, we think it's going to be around 9.2%, assuming that things return to normalcy only from August onwards. Because I think practically speaking, until the end of June, we would be having lockdowns in almost all states, and it will be probably from July onwards that there could be some kind of relaxation taking place. Now, what does this also mean? This also means that a lot of jobs have been lost. I think you have given the numbers out there. So there's going to be a lot of pain of saying that, okay, jobs have been lost, income comes down, consumption power comes down, people are spending more on medication, on healthcare rather than on consumer goods. And all this definitely means that the economy is going to be set back. And the kind of growth which we expected, even though it could have been notional in terms of being statistical, that's not quite going to realize. And the more important thing, to answer the question which you started off with as to who should be taking an action, yes, it has to be the state governments. We cannot expect the center to do it because the lockdowns will not come from the center. Individual states will have to take action. And unfortunately, so far, we haven't seen any affirmative action being taken by states. I think in Maharashtra, the government did announce a package of around 5,500 crores. But when I talk to the bhajiwalas, the rickshawalas outside, none of them really know how to get that 1,500 rupees. But finally, the onus does fall on the states because it has been a state action. It's not been an action taken at the national level.
Okay, so you say that it's the individual states who will have to look at it, and I agree with you, not too many states have come out with much right now, but because they're the ones who brought in the lockdown, they're the ones who should now take care of the people as well. But let me bring in Sunil Alag as well on this. Sunil, what is, is it worse this time really? Because like, Madan was pointing out, during times of a lockdown, and when you're looking at medical bills, when you're looking at more hospital trips and testing bills, you're probably not spending anywhere else. Last time, people were largely insulated from all of this in their homes, perhaps figuring out various ways of doing some amount of spending here and there. This time, if there is any spending, it's perhaps only on healthcare.
Fully agree with you, Tanvi, that look, I've been saying it for the last 2 years in the budget. It's the middle income group that has been ignored. It's been ignored, about 300 million people, where nothing has been done since the last budget, which was in February, and even in this budget, because you need to get the consumption growing. Whether it's in America, anywhere, you see that if consumption grows, the economy will grow. And I don't think anything has been done. Basically, the center has taken care of the poor, and I am fully in support of that. But by now, they should have realized that, look, you haven't brought any savings on taxes. You haven't given them, all the petrol prices have gone up, all the food prices have gone up, everything has gone up. So doing something for the middle income group is now imperative, and we cannot wait for next year's budget to do it. That having said, look, it's not all gloom and doom as far as I'm concerned. April, May, June, this quarter is more or less, April wasn't gone. It's May and June which is going to affect everybody at this point of time. I am an eternal optimist, and I see from the month of July, mainly because of the vaccines coming in, and we are running short of vaccines. That is the main issue at this point of time. If the vaccines start coming in by end May or early June, as they've been ordered, and as Covishield or Covaxin is stepping up production, you will see that there will be a decline in the COVID that is happening all over. Now, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not saying it was something that we were caught napping. It's about time we apologize for it, whether it's the state or whether it's the center, we should apologize for it. And I think I have lived by Thomas Jefferson's quote. I mean, when he was president, he said, look, I like to live on the dreams of the future than the realities of the past. The past we can carry on hammering away to blazes and give all the facts and figures that we want. The question is, what are we going to do now? We need the suggestions now for the month of May, June, and July. I'm sure by December we'll have come out of it, and October and November we'll have come out of it. So there's no point in giving us the glimpse of the obvious that, look, we're in this trouble. We need solutions for the months of June, May, and therefore I agree with somebody who says 12, 13% growth is gone, but we could still hit 10% if things get rectified by the month of July. If we don't get it rectified and it goes on for the whole year, then obviously we will have to review the figure all over again. As far as I'm concerned, we could be anywhere between 9 to 10%, even if we get going by July and all the vaccines come in and people get vaccines. Because at this point of time, most of the people that I had met earlier were saying, mujhe nahi hoga. Now the attitude is mujhe hoga. So there's a great demand for vaccines, there's a great demand for testing, and we don't have the vaccines. So that should get rectified soon enough.
Yes, I mean, at least in most of the urban parts, I don't think there is any more vaccine hesitancy. Yes, go ahead, Sunil.
there is a shortage of vaccine. There's no hesitancy, but we've also woken up as people a lot later than we should have. No,
Correct.
we should have gone in for vaccines last year when it was available. At that time, people were saying, "Nahi, mujhe nahi hoga. I don't want to do it." Now they are saying attitude of the people have also changed. At the same time, there's a vaccine shortage. Vaccines are being ordered, and I think the middle
No, I
income
disagree with you. I disagree with you. We weren't even eligible last year. It opened up to people above the age of 45 outside of healthcare workers only March onwards. So I
Yeah.
don't think that, the hesitancy was any which way is a very big problem even then. The first few weeks, yes, maybe as it is for any new thing. And by the time people began to queue up, we ran out of it. We would have run out of it sooner. That's all that would have changed. Rather than
but
figuring this out in April, perhaps we would have figured it out in March. But that being said, let's come back to the big point because, yes, you're right. And I don't want to get into a conversation right now about the vaccine policy. We are where we are, and let's just hope it gets, it picks up pace from here. More vaccines are in the market by next month and in July, which is. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, Sunil.
Has to be looked after because if they don't step up on consumption, the economy will go and collapse in no time. It's the middle income group that's been ignored, and I'm not blaming anyone for it. I'm not saying that the villagers, because with a good monsoons, agriculture will be up. Let me tell you, a good monsoon is predicted. Everybody in the rural areas will start spending, but the middle income group is been totally ignored for the last year and a half.
Okay, so Sunil Alag makes a strong case for the middle income groups. Let me also bring in Professor Arun Kumar and ask him, Professor Kumar, do we have an additional problem this time around versus last year? Because this time, COVID has also hit rural India very badly, a part of our country which was largely immune to this last year.
So, Tanvi, we have to step back a little and see where we are situated in terms of the economy and what might happen in the rural areas. You see, the vaccination is the only cure for the disease because we don't have a medicine as yet. So we needed to vaccinate very rapidly so that the population was protected. Now, to get to herd immunity, you require to vaccinate 60% of the population at least, which means 84 crore people, which meant about 170 crore doses. So starting January, we should have started with 10 crore vaccinations per month and ramped it up to 20 crore vaccinations per month to get to herd immunity by the end of the year. Now we know that at the current rate, we are not going to be able to vaccinate 60% even by March next year. So therefore, the disease is going to continue to multiply in the economy and will not suddenly come down after July or September. If you remember, even 15 days back, we have only ordered about 11 crore doses. Now, 11 crore doses for the coming 2 months means, we are never going to achieve the herd immunity even by middle of next year. We should have ordered at least 25, 30 crores, of vaccines doses per month, so that we can vaccinate rapidly. So I think, this idea that, vaccination will help us is not going to work. Second thing is that we delayed the announcement of the lockdown. We didn't have a complete lockdown in April. And if you go by the experience of Brazil and the USA, they delayed they didn't have a lockdown nationally. Brazil never went for a lockdown. So there the first wave, the second wave and the third wave have merged. So in my article yesterday in The Wire, I pointed out that the Indian second wave could merge into the third wave, and especially because children are not vaccinated, there's a fear that there'll be a third wave, and that could be very devastating. And as a result of that, I think if the second and the third wave merge, we are looking at a wave that might last till about February next year. In which case, consumption is not going to revive. As it is, the consumer sentiment was way down. If you look at the RBI figures for January, the consumer sentiment index was down to 55 as compared to 105 a year back. And that consumer sentiment is going to fall further. Now, because the wave has spread into the rural areas, and it can come back to the urban areas because you see it's spreading very rapidly in the rural areas, and it will mutate. The more rapidly a wave spreads, the more it mutates. And the more it mutates, the more the problems come up with the next wave. So I think if the mutations take place and it returns back to the urban areas, which may get opened up, say, as people are saying by July or August, then if it comes back as a third wave, as a mutant wave that comes to the senior people also, then I think we are seeing a huge problem. So consumer sentiment is down in the rural areas, consumer sentiment is down in the urban areas, and also because of the disease in the rural areas, even agriculture is going to get hit. Workers there are getting hit, and the long COVID means
Okay.
that the disease has a problem. The third is that you see, because of the consumer sentiment going down and consumption not picking up after July, August, your investment will be hit because capacity utilization was already low in the economy. As per the RBI data in January, capacity utilization was at 63%,
Correct.
which was 10% below last year, and now it has come down further. So therefore, if capacity utilization is low, fresh investment is not going to take place. So in other words, investment and consumption both will be hit, and government is not coming forward with a huge expenditure platform so that the demand could be boosted. Exports may work, but if there are supply bottlenecks in the Indian economy, then exports may not take off, in spite of the fact that the other major economies are reviving. But the other major economies reviving also means that commodity prices will start rising, and that will hit us further through inflation. Inflation is high because of the low base last year, but inflation is also high because of the food prices, etc., rising at this point, given the supply chain bottlenecks that have taken place in agriculture. So in other words, inflation will be a worry, because if inflation takes place, then you'll have a situation in which the demand will not pick up as it should have picked up, and therefore the rate of growth will come down. So my estimate is that in Q1,
Yeah.
because April was good, so April rate of growth would be good, but May has been like last year's May, and June will be worse than last year. So, earlier it was expected that the Q1 will show 20-25% growth. I think that'll be down to 5%. And Q2 will be worse because of the consumer sentiment being down and the investment climate having declined. And Q3, we are not able to tell because we don't know how long the wave will last and what will happen to the vaccination program. Unless we know enough about that, we will not be able to predict Q3 and Q4. But my suspicion is Q3 and Q4 would be negative. Therefore, whereas year as a whole, the rate of growth would be considerably down compared to the 10-11% that was being suggested earlier. It may be down to just 0% or 2% or 3%, as compared to last year. So we are not going to return back to the 2019 level of GDP.
Yes, I think because when those
soon.
projections were made, just for everyone's, our viewers' understanding also, those largely those projections were made assuming that they will not be a repeat of what we saw last year or another bad another wave in simple terms. But what we ended up having was worse than what was in the first wave. Loss of lives, homes destroyed, and of course, lockdowns across the country, even if it's not a nationwide announcement that came in, and curves which are now perhaps going to go on for several more weeks. I have two more panels that I need to go to, and Sunil, I know you want to make a point, but let me just get in views from Mr. Anil Padmanabhan as well. Mr. Padmanabhan, Madan said that this time he believes the responsibility will be on the states, should be on the states, because they're the ones who brought in the restrictions as well. Is that largely the sense you're picking up from the government as well, that the central government is not seriously looking at a very big package like it did last May?
See, Tanvi, I don't know what the union government is thinking, but just to add to the debate, the issue is that you have rightly identified there's been a phenomenal erosion of income across all demographies in this country, barring the 1%. So in this circumstance, if your idea is to mitigate the lives versus livelihood debate here, so you have to mitigate the damage to the livelihood and thereby to the lives of these people. So any package that comes from the union government or state government, which I think Karnataka has done today, will have to be directed towards protecting the lives and livelihood of those at the bottom of the pyramid. So and secondly, the point Sunil is making that the middle income has been neglected is right, but I don't think a package is going to help there, because people are going to hoard the money because they are scared, like Arun Kumar just established, that the consumer sentiment is severely down. So people are not going to spend the money, the extra money they get, they're going to hoard it, and it will give them a protection, a cushion, but it won't add to the consumption levels in the economy. My final point is that let's recognize that this virus is going to stay with you for some time. All this blame game about whether we bought enough vaccines, etc., don't matter. That ship has sailed long ago. Right now, you have to recognize the fact this virus is going to stay with us. The United Kingdom, which just opened up, is looking to go back into lockdown because there's a fresh surge of the virus there.
So vaccine or no vaccine, you're going to live with this. So you're going to be, as a result, you're going to look at lockdown, which seems to be the primary weapon to deal with the situation, and which also means that your effective 12 months in a year is going to shrink. So you are, as it is, we have lost about 2 months, as Madan rightly identified, which is May and June. Probably economy will things will open up in July, and thereafter you'll probably have another wave, and you'll probably have another lockdown. So you safely assume that a quarter of your year is going to be lost. So what GDP that you're talking of, or livelihoods that you're talking about, are going to be 8 months. So prepare for that too. So, and drawing from this, you have a attendant public policy issue. There are lots of more new poor in the system. People who scaled up, who got out of poverty, have fallen back into poverty in the last 1 year. There aren't enough estimates around, but the World Bank has put out some numbers saying it could be anywhere between about 100 to 120 million, not in India, but across South Asia. And so you have a problem of new poor, you have a problem of the poor who have become poorer, right? And you have become, the rich have not got so hit. So you have an inequality issue also which has come into play. So public policy now is really have to be on its toes. And I do agree that we have to go back and revisit every policy aspect which we put in place in February or March or whenever. And you'll need to build a resilience. So maybe a starting point could be where the GST Council meets and the FMs and the FM, our Union FM also meet. Probably they could start discussing these issues at that point. Thank you.
Yes, very interesting the way you put it across. And Mr. Vineet Agarwal, I think you should also comment on this, because the businesses also, just as the policy makers will have to realign themselves and view this differently, even the businesses will have to, industries will have to view this entire year differently. It's no more about, one-time lockdown, we came out of it, we assumed and we hope never again there will be a lockdown, and slowly we will get the wheels of the, economy engine moving. Now, it does seem like what Mr. Anil Padmanabhan said, multiple waves, perhaps repeated lockdowns, localized lockdowns, if at that. But it does impact the industry every single time. It will impact your consumer sentiment, demand. It will impact your supply chain, your distribution, even for what you need to manufacture, all of that gets hit. So how will the businesses now realign themselves to this new reality that perhaps in a year, there will always be a few months where you will not be able to function?
Yes, thanks. Like Mr. Alag, I am also an eternal optimist, because the Indian economy has surprised us many times in the past, and I think it will continue to surprise us. The resilience is very high. So I think we have to see how we've sort of got into this lockdown. We started off the previous lockdown, the national lockdown really started off with a one-time bang. Versus now we've gone from a micro containment strategy to very localized, and it's a slower lockdown. So that has meant that there's a lot more uncertainty this time round. But though there is a lot of uncertainties, a lot of other factories and businesses have not really shut down where they were asked to shut down in the first lockdown. So businesses have been still running, though across the country. Supply chains have been active and they've not been disrupted. Process industries are running. Of course, now we are going to see impact more and more, because it's more or less like a national lockdown. Almost all states have announced some form of a lockdown, which means that there is some disruption in labor, for sure, that started to happen. There is some disruption in the supply of certain material. And the people who are getting hit the most is clearly the MSME sector. Now, the bigger companies, even as we saw in the first lockdown, they did benefit. And you've seen corporate results really coming out quite phenomenally in the last quarter. So it's the MSMEs that are getting hit. And as well as certain industries, certain sectors like the services sector, the high contact sector, small shopkeepers, the rediwalas, the person on the street, they are definitely getting hit. I still believe that the agriculture supply chain is quite intact. We've seen procurement has been much higher this year compared to last year. So that is gives us a lot more confidence. The government has also hiked the fertilizer subsidy. So it is promoting a lot of, and the monsoon is expected to be very good. So I think I'm a little bit more confident on the agri supply chain side. Now, we have identified these problems. We know that there are industries that are going to be hit. We know there's going to be consumer sentiment that's going to be hit. Now, let's look at solutions, because we have to now start thinking about the next few months. And as Mr. Padmanabhan also just said, there would be some series of lockdowns, which might continue, that's fine. But support to these people, the small shopkeepers, the daily wage workers, and ultimately MSMEs is essential in terms of how you start rebuilding the economy again. Now, what MSMEs are looking for is mostly access to finance, because they need some restructuring, whether it's their loan restructured or some additional credit guarantees that they're getting. They need access to markets. So as we are progressing and they are opening up, and we've seen the impact of GST has been phenomenal, because a lot of MSMEs are now able to sell nationally. For them, India is a full market. So that's a very positive sign. And then they are now, we have to force them to be more digital.
Okay, so we have two optimists on this panel. Always good to hear various voices here. But let me say this, and again I bring back the consumption point. What's the point of these industries which are still managing to function or being allowed to function if there is nobody to buy it? If what's the point of construction activity still going on, Professor Arun Kumar, when nobody is going to be buying a house anytime soon? What's the point of time if automobile industry manages to make cars when people are not going to be buying a car or even getting out of their house for 6 months in a year? What's the point in a textile being able to make clothes when there are no shops open, there are no restaurants open for dine-in, it's only takeaways, and this is now becoming a bigger reality?
So, you're right that without consumption and demand being low, industry would not produce. And that's why I said capacity utilization would go down further. And when capacity utilization goes down further, then new investment would go down. And when new investment goes down, then consumption comes down further, because there's increased unemployment. And this is a vicious cycle that's taking place. And this time in the second wave, you can see that the elite class and the middle classes are hit particularly badly. And one index of that is that you see, if you look at the obituary columns in Times of India, they used to be half a page to a quarter page. And now there are more than 2 pages, and yesterday and day before about 4 pages. So you can see that the number of middle class and upper elite class houses that have been affected is very high. Everybody you talk to in your circles, you find somebody's ill, somebody's died, etc. And therefore the consumer sentiment in the consuming classes, the middle classes and upper classes, has come down dramatically. And that's not going to recover very quickly, because when you have loss of family, you have loss of friends, that stays with you. So, the resumption of consumption is going to pose a serious challenge. And, you can also see that people are keeping more liquid. The amount of currency in circulation has shot up because people are holding more currency. They're not, keeping bank accounts. They're not keeping, the money on expenditure. And because of the fear of third wave possibility, people are going to hold liquidity because medical expenses have shot up. Large number of middle class families have had huge expenditures, and a lot of lower middle class people have gone into debt. So their consumption is going to go down in the lower middle classes because they're in debt. They won't have the surplus to be able to consume. And the middle classes, because they have taken a lot of hit because of the huge medical expenses, their liquidity is going to be down. And the upper classes also, there'll be an effect on their consumption because they also are worried. There's a sentiment downturn. So I think we have to factor all these things in from the different classes. And what our colleague was saying about MSME, the lower category of people who have lost a lot of income, they anyway are in trouble, and the government hasn't come out with a program of supporting. The Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme expenditure last year was 1.1 lakh crore. That in this budget has been cut to 70,000 crores, whereas the demand has gone up. And RBI data showed that last year under the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, most families got an average of 50 days of work instead of 100 days of work. So the demand was there, but there's not enough money. And if there's not enough money at that level, then their consumption will also be affected. And finally, let me say, because the wave has gone into the rural areas, it's affecting workers there. Agriculture productivity may also be affected. And that will be there in the next crop, not of course in the current Rabi crop, which has already come in, but in the Kharif crop, if the second, third wave merges into one another, then workers' capacity to work would be affected, their productivity would be affected, and that would also happen in industry, that the long COVID leaves people very weak. People are not able to work to the same capacity. So there are many worries that we have to think about, and we have to plan for it now. And it's not for the state governments that they can tackle the situation, because their resource position is already quite weak. Last year they had a lot of shortage of resources. Central government has to find the resources, but the central government also will have trouble, because if the economy comes down, then the tax revenue will come down. Last year, if you notice, the fiscal deficit rose because tax revenue had come down, not because expenditures had increased dramatically. So again, if the tax revenues come down, then again you'll have problem that the fiscal deficit would start rising, and therefore the government would cut back, because now the government would be much more sensitive to credit rating agencies. Last year everybody was raising their fiscal deficit, but now many of the major economies, they are coming out of the pandemic and they are boosting their economy, so there the fiscal deficit may come down. So India, to boost its fiscal deficit this year, would be more problematic than last year. So resource shortage will be there, and therefore what we need to do is to step up our expenditures in a very planned way, because otherwise we'll be short of expenditures and that will create problems.
Yeah. Yes, and several of the other countries that went through tough times last year as well have managed to vaccinate a much larger percentage of their population as well. So we will see them, perhaps getting back faster to the kind of normal life that we had than it would take for a country as large as ours with the kind of population we have. So we come back to the question of who needs to step in and to what extent. Maharashtra has announced so far, a 5,000 crore package largely to address the immediate needs of a certain segment of people. Karnataka has done so as well today. 1,250 crore package, cash that they would be giving to construction workers, daily workers, auto and cab drivers, to ensure that they manage to survive through these lockdown days. Delhi has repeatedly spoken about, where they are stepping up in their welfare schemes in terms of giving food to people. But beyond that, we haven't seen any activity. And Mr. Anil Padmanabhan, who should step in there? Because the states are also going to turn around and say, well, we don't have the money either. Center won't give us our share of the tax money. We have to spend now also on vaccines, which is a significant part of our annual budget. So what do we do?
Tanvi, first off, I'm not part of the doom scrolling corner. Okay? Absolutely not. I think I'm just very pragmatic about things. So what I mentioned to you was the kind of blueprint that you probably want to look at. Now, going back to your point, I don't think the union government has denied states their share in taxes by any chance. There was a bit of a hesitancy in paying it out on time, but it has been paid out. So the tax share part, you don't need to worry about. The issue is that fiscally, I don't think either the center or the state governments are in a space to undertake massive stimulus packages. I don't think so, unless they can prove us wrong. Or if they do very extraordinary steps, like depending on the RBI balance sheet, etc., which is a big debate in itself, where they go down that path. But you do need extraordinary steps. But please recognize, I don't think we have yet recognized in this conversation that this is a once-in-a-century pandemic. So you're going to be hit severely. If you want to take a comparison, not just to the 1918 the influenza epidemic which hit the world, but you should look back at the plague that hit Mumbai. If you go back and read the text, it was complete devastation. So luckily, medical science has progressed so much and we are in an economically better place that we have been able to mitigate that damage. So you are in actually a crisis situation at this point. The problem is that I think the narrative took hold from July last year that we were picking up very fast, things will get out. So there is a assumption that we are not in the pandemic anymore. I think if we disabuse ourselves of that sentiment, we'll be able to come up with more realistic, pragmatic solutions within a framework. So recognize the fact that the epidemic is part of yours. And like I said, no matter how much money you put in now, people have been severely eroded. Right now, your strategy should be to prevent more people from joining the ranks of the new poor. Those who have come out of poverty, you should hang on to them. Those who are very poor, you need to defend them. So all your money has to go towards protecting them. Please understand, if you don't do that, like they say, jaan hai, jahan hai, you will pay a severe price later down the line. In this effort that I will spend money and I stimulate the economy, you are not the United States. You're a developing country, you work within a certain paradigm. Your priority now is lives and livelihood.
I am sure, Mr. Sunil Alagh, you have something to say to this.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Padmanabhan substantially in whatever he has said, because ultimately, at the end of the day, there's enough research to say when you give money to the poor, they spend it. When you give money to the middle income group, they tend to save it. That I agree with. My idea of the center coming and saying that, look, if you spend money, you'll get a tax relief. Don't give them money in their hands because they're tending to save it. If you spend on, say, on buying an air ticket, if you spend on petrol, if you spend on anything, I am talking about putting money indirectly into the hands of the middle income group and not directly. That's what I was suggesting. And I agree with Mr. Padmanabhan and all that he said. Professor Arun Kumar, and I respect him a lot. I've been on a lot of debates with him, but he always gives a picture of doom. And if you don't question his assumptions, you will go along with his conclusions. His assumption is only 11 crores of doses have been ordered in May and June, and that's what will till February 2022. Government has already come out and said by December we'll have enough doses. Why aren't you quoting the latest figure, Professor Arun Kumar? Instead of misleading everybody, you make the assumption that April, June, and May is the last. We won't get any more. Then, of course, till next year, we will not get enough. So, Professor Arun Kumar, you have to admit that he will raise all the issues. He will confuse you with a lot of figures, but there are no solutions in what he's suggesting. We all know what he's saying. Look, what are the things that you have to do in the months of May and June? I'm saying give indirect taxation, give money into the hands of the consumer and not giving it directly. But I'm making a suggestion. I'm not saying you have to accept it. Professor Arun Kumar is making a whole lot of things because, look, industry will also play its role from July onwards to say second, third, fourth dose, everything is going to happen to us simultaneously. Then forget it. Then that's the end of the world now. Professor Arun Kumar. I mean, I am holding out some optimism.
No,
maybe I'm wrong.
It's not about putting out Mr. Sunil Alagh, end of the world kind of prophecies here, all to talk about a doomsday scenario. I think the doomsday as we know it is pretty much what we are living and what people in the cities and in many villages have gone through. Forever, thousands of people in our country have been scarred. There is no way I can make this sound any better than what it is.
No, but I'm saying
and that is the reality that our country has gone through. It is also a fact that this can happen to us again. We are far, far away from what we need in terms of vaccination. And there will be a third wave and perhaps even fourth.
What is the point of the government saying that by December they have ordered enough vaccines? It will come. You're disagreeing with that. Then there's no debate anymore. Only what we are getting in May and June. That's
yes, I am. I am sorry. No, I am. Of course, you can go. The government also told us that by this summer there will be many more brands in the market already and that everybody will be able to get vaccination. That's not happened. The government also said they're going to target 50 lakh vaccinations per day. We've come back to less than half of it. The government has put out a vision of vaccines for 200 crore doses that will be with us by end of this year. Many of those brands and candidates, vaccine candidates, are still under trial. And I will only go by what I see is happening.
I agree with you. Then you go with Arun Kumar's doomsday. I'm saying that, look, there's another point of view to yours. You can't say that what I'm talking is rubbish. That's all that I'm saying.
Okay, so Professor Arun Kumar, everybody knows what the reality is. Let's talk solutions. That's what Sunil Alagh is also saying.
Asking for solutions.
So Tanvi, point is, Mr. Sunil Alagh might say that everything is hunky-dory, and that's also not true. And I'm not saying that, Sunil, please listen. I listen to you. Sunil, just listen. Listen, Sunil, you're not listening. you are intervening, whereas I did not intervene. No matter what you said about me, doomsday, this, that, etc. What I'm presenting is a realistic picture, and the
I
realistic
don't
picture is that even if we
you
order doses now, we are not going to be able to get to 60% of the population getting vaccinated even till February, March. Because even if the government orders the doses, it has to be vaccinated. So the vaccination will take time, and that's what we've seen in the last 6 months. How do we know that it's going to happen immediately after that? And then if there's a new mutant and there's a vaccine escape, then you'll be in further trouble. So I think what we have to do is be realistic about the situation rather than be overly optimistic or unduly pessimistic. What I'm presenting is a realistic picture of the situation. So Sunil, please listen. And now the question of solution. The solution would come provided we build our systems. For instance, the medical systems have to be built up. We have to build capacity for vaccination. We have to do more research on virology, which we are not doing. Our universities are closed, so the research on virology has come down. All our research on virology is coming from the US and UK. It's not happening here. We need to ramp up genome testing so that we can track any new genomes that keep coming in. So there are a lot of things that need to be done. For instance, the government needs to take care of the poor people who are losing employment. That should be the first task, because if these people who are losing employment, they go out of business, they go out of work, then the demand would not pick up. So I think what we need to do is a series of steps, and the government has to therefore prioritize. I think what the government has not done is government has not come out with its priorities as to how to tackle the situation. Apart from saying that we will have enough doses after July, apart from that, there are no other serious steps that would bring the economy back to heel.
If I may just now steer this conversation to another aspect that we've not touched upon today, and Mr. Madan Sabnavis, I will come to you on that, which is what was the government's plan originally as of February when the budget was announced for this year in terms of spending? And will that now, how much of that will even be possible this year? Not only is the government's revenues going to come down, but even on the expenditure front, clearly a lot more will now have to be done for welfare schemes to help people, to ensure people have enough food on their plate, to give them money in lockdown times, and also for healthcare. So what happens to the plan that was presented to us in the month of Feb?
Go back to the budget and see how exactly it was structured. I think the so-called discretionary spending in the form of capex, which is what all of us talk about, which is supposed to be growth inducing, it was higher by around 1.5 lakh crores only, out of which I think another 1.5 lakh crores actually goes for defense. So in fact, I think there's not more than 1 lakh crores which was targeted for roads and railways in particular, followed by a little bit on urban development. So we're looking at these three areas. To my mind, I don't think it will be a major challenge for them to meet these expenditures, because I think the government is cognizant of the fact that the states are not in a position, or they're not willing to spend more than what they should be doing. Because I think one interesting statistic, I think we all say what the state government should do, the states don't have the ability. But the interesting part is that last year when all of them number, I think on an average basis it came to less than even 3.5%. So I think states are very, very conservative when it comes to borrowing, and they must be having their own reasons for it. Coming back to the central government, yes, there will definitely be certain shortfalls in revenue, because the government had drawn the budget on the basis of a certain GDP growth rate, which all of us believe will probably not materialize. But I think there's enough space for them to borrow more in the market. I think the RBI has been very in providing all the facilities that there is a plethora of liquidity which is going into the reverse repo window. So I think there shouldn't be any problem in terms of distorting the market if the government goes in for higher borrowing, a higher fiscal deficit number. And frankly, if I think the government does such a thing, it will be well appreciated also by the credit rating agencies. So we should not really think of it. And that's what Anil was saying, this is an unusual situation. And I think we need to take these kind of measures. In fact, another thing which probably I think we haven't really spoken of what Western economies did last year. They were direct cash transfers which were given to everyone. The US did it, UK did it, Germany did it, France did it, Italy did it. I think this is something which we have not done. So realistically speaking, again, if you look at the government last year, what did they do? A lot of money was spent to go beyond that. Most of it was in terms of which work over 3 to 4. But not immediately. So therefore, I would not be expecting it will be more in case of providing relief, which is left again to the states. And I think the states have taken by fiscal deficit number, they don't have to be conservative and stick to 3% or 3.5%. If you look at most of the budgets for fiscal 22, most of them have been conservative. They're not really touching that 4% mark, which has been permitted by the FRBM.
Okay, interesting that you say that, but let me just also say good evening to Kumar Rajgopalan, CEO of the Retailers Association of India, joining us right now. Mr. Rajgopalan, we were having a heated debate also about, what should be the solutions that we look at and who should lead that. Should it be the center or the state governments this time, since they are largely now handling the healthcare, they're also handling vaccination, and they're handling the decisions on lockdowns as well?
So I represent retail, and that's what I understand most, Tanvi, and it's nice to kind of come back onto your show again. The plight of the retailers is correctly known to most of us. We know that when you say lockdown, the first set of people who get hit are definitely retailers. They are expected to shut their shops. So the nearby salon gets shut, the nearby clothes merchant is retail is also shut. We have this concept called the essential, non-essential that's been happening in this country for some time now. And therefore, many of these so-called non-essential stores get shut also. And it's been happening at various parts. This time, of course, it's been happening at a state level. But merely because some of the states are shutting down the shops and they are taking some action doesn't mean that everything rests only on the state. It's not as if the state has to be blamed for what is happening. We all know that it's COVID, it's a pandemic. And therefore, there has to be everybody who has to come in and do their part to try and get the economy back on its feet. And I think that's what is important at the current instance. For example, all of us know that the biggest worry in everybody's mind is vaccines. And as Retailers Association, I have been also talking to the states as well as the center, stating that all these people who are available at the front end, we call them the last mile workers, because these are the people who are meeting 50, 60, 70 customers a day. And these are the people who should be given some priority to get vaccinated, because otherwise they are meeting that many more people, and that could not be a very nice thing to happen. So that's the first part. The first requirement is, of course, vaccination. I think everybody is agreeing that vaccination is the big requirement, and we know that countries which are able to do good vaccination are now talking about big economic comebacks, so that we are seeing already across the globe. So we hope that vaccination drive happens. Now, whether it is the state that's procuring, the center that's procuring, frankly, they've got to coordinate and get their act right. I think that's important. Now, we cannot be talking about this on a debate in this form. The second part is about how do we really kickstart the economy? How do we make sure that things can continue? And there we do face problems. As retailers, I think many retailers have been completely out of business for some time now. Even when things picked up in the month of September, October last year, it was just picking up. It was not anywhere near the pre-pandemic levels. And now it's been all the wells have run dry. They do not have enough money to pay wages. They do not have enough money to pay back to their suppliers. And there, I think the requirement, as in case everybody knows, is about pumping some finance into the hands of these retailers. And when I talk about retailers, I'm talking about restaurants, I'm talking about the salons, I'm talking about the people who are selling various goods, people who sell hardware. All these people have come under pressure. And the only way is to, A, give them money to meet their running expenses, which is fixed expenses, which anyway they have to incur. They have to still pay rentals, they have to still pay wages, and that is very, very important. Otherwise, you lose jobs. And already last year, we lost almost 30% jobs. We slowly recouped some part of that, and then it came to about 20% loss of jobs. Now, no retailer wants to get back into a situation wherein they have to remove more people from their stores. So I think the most important thing is to first have expenditure money available for paying salaries, paying the minimum electricity charges that's still supposed to be paid. In many of the states, the property taxes are yet to be paid by the retailers, and I do hope the states will support the retail on the various industries which have been shut down and say at least the property taxes will not get charged the way it is. And then there is a need for the center to definitely step in, because there are various things that's there on the finance part which only the center can come in. For example, this whole thing around the ECLGS that had come up last time, 2.0, which has now become 3.0. The ECLGS has to be immediately be available for the people in the retail sector. Now, last time it was defined in 2.0 that retail is a stress sector, it would get given. Now it's not been already told. So that means there is already retailers sitting there thinking, would I be able to get emergency funds or would I not be able to get? Secondly, moratorium. There is no talk of moratorium. That the Reserve Bank and the central government has to come together to get that moratorium thing happening, because if people are still supposed to pay their interest and their EMIs, especially at the business level, they will not be able to do that at all. At the individual level, it's anyway a problem. So that's the second part. The third part that is required is definitely ad hoc working capital to be able to take care of things. So I think these are things that you cannot say it's only one person. Even within the industry, I'm seeing some collaboration happening. For example, some of the landlords, some of the malls are currently working again with their own retailers to say, okay, how much of the hit can I take? How much can you take? Many of the suppliers are saying, okay, what is the head shave that I would be willing to take up? So I think these are things that we need to bring in. It cannot be just one person taking up the brunt of it. I think that's where it is. We can come out of the situation, but
okay, so very quickly, I want to bring in Vineet also on this, because Vineet also touched upon enabling more schemes for people to be able to borrow money, especially in the MSME sector, the smaller businesses where there is more pain right now, enabling more borrowing of money, more relief on the moratorium, loan repayment front. Vineet, would you agree? That's also required, and to solve the problem of cash in hand to run these businesses.
Absolutely, Tanvi. I think the work has to be done by everyone. It is not a time that we can pick and choose. States have to do their job, center has to do their job. Now, to think from the center's perspective, what about increasing the working capital limits of MSMEs by 20% without any collateral? So this is a very simple thing that can be done. Like this, there are many such other smaller things that can be done that can really start supporting MSMEs. There was someone who mentioned about stimulating demand. Can we do GST rationalization? Again, this is in the hand of the center. And of course, front-ending all kinds of expenditure related to infrastructure, especially in the healthcare sector. I think that's very, very important. And now on the state side, they can support by giving the daily wage workers, the workers, the shopkeepers, etc., some support by some income supplement, or at the agri sector, again, giving them the Manrega scheme implementation at the fullest possible level, and simultaneously encouraging the kind of investment that has to happen at the state level as well. So I think the role today is for everyone to step in. We have to come out more positive, and we have to start supporting industry both by both center and by state.
Fair enough. And I think everybody, you're absolutely right. Everybody needs to come together. These are unprecedented times. The responsibility cannot be of one single entity at all. And neither can one single entity say, okay, I've done my part, I will not do any more. This is not going to be a situation that we will be out of anytime soon. Yes, things will get better. They could get worse again and better again. If anything, by now, we can learn that lesson from the rest of the world as well. Countries that have gone into multiple lockdowns, that have seen multiple waves, and we didn't want to believe that would happen to us, but the second wave did happen to us. So better to now learn those lessons and prepare accordingly and work as a team, rather than actually putting blame or responsibility on the other side. A big thank you to all of the panelists who joined us. Suffice to say, viewers, whatever projections, forecasts we had of a recovery in economy this year around will not happen to that extent. But can we take enough steps to get some kind of growth at least back? We'll have to wait and watch. Thank you so much for joining us.